The snow fell in thick, wet flakes that December morning when Ella Morgan stepped off the stagecoach in Silver Creek, Oregon. She clutched a worn leather valise in one hand and a folded letter in the other, the letter that had brought her 2,000 miles from Philadelphia to this muddy logging town perched on the edge of nowhere. The driver tossed her trunk down with a grunt, not bothering to help her with it. He'd been eyeing her strangely since Portland, and she knew why. At 5 feet 11 inches, she towered over most women and stood eye to eye with many men. Her height had always been a burden back east, but William Prescott's letter had promised it wouldn't matter here. The frontier needs strong women. He'd written, "Your stature speaks of capability, not impropriety." She stood there in the swirling snow, watching the stagecoach disappear around the bend, taking with it the last connection to the world she'd known. The main street of Silver Creek stretched before her, a line of rough-hewn buildings with false fronts, their unpainted wood already gray with weather. The acrid smell of sawdust mixed with wood smoke and the sharper tang of pine resin from the mill at the far end of town. Men in heavy wool coats and cork boots trudged through the slush, most heading toward the mill for the afternoon shift. They glanced at her as they passed, some curious, some dismissive, a few with expressions she'd learned to recognize and ignore. A woman traveling alone always drew attention, but a woman of her height drew stares. She squared her shoulders and lifted her trunk, grateful for the strength in her arms that years of seamstress work had given her. The Timber Rose Hotel stood halfway down the street, its painted sign swinging in the wind. That's where William had said to meet him. The lobby was dim and smelled of tobacco and wet wool. A thin man with pomaded hair looked up from behind the desk, his eyes widening slightly as he took in her height. "I'm looking for Mr. William Prescott," she said, setting down her trunk with relief. "He's expecting me. Miss Ella Morgan from Philadelphia." The clerk's expression shifted surprise mixed with something that looked uncomfortably like pity. "Mr. Prescott. I'll fetch him for you. Miss, perhaps you'd like to wait in the parlor." She shook her head. "I'll wait here, thank you." 10 minutes passed, then 15. Her wet traveling dress clung uncomfortably to her legs, and melting snow dripped from the brim of her bonnet. When William Prescott finally appeared, she knew immediately that something was wrong. He was shorter than she'd imagined, a good 4 inches shorter than her, with thinning brown hair and a weak chin partially hidden by ambitious sideburns. His eyes traveled up her frame with growing dismay. "Miss Morgan," his voice cracked slightly on her name. Mr. Prescott." She extended her gloved hand, which he took briefly before dropping it as if it burned. "I've come as we agreed. Your letter spoke of a position at the school and—" "There's been a misunderstanding." He couldn't meet her eyes, focusing instead on a point somewhere near her collar. "When you wrote of being tall, I assumed, that is, I thought perhaps 5'6", maybe 7 at most, but this—" He gestured vaguely at her person. "This is quite impossible." The lobby seemed to shrink around her. 2 loggers at a nearby table had stopped their card game to watch. "Impossible," she repeated, her voice steady despite the cold weight settling in her stomach. "Surely you must see how it would look. A schoolmarm should be, that is, the children need a figure of gentle authority. Not—" He swallowed. "And as for the other matter we discussed, the personal matter, well, a man has his dignity to consider." She felt heat rise in her cheeks despite the cold. "My height has no bearing on my ability to teach, Mr. Prescott. As for your dignity, I fail to see how—" "The position has been filled," he interrupted, backing toward the stairs. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience, but surely you understand. A woman of your proportions might find work at one of the camps. They need cooks, laundresses. Hardy women do well there." He fled up the stairs before she could respond, leaving her standing in the lobby with every eye upon her. The silence stretched until one of the loggers snickered a low, mean sound that broke something inside her. She picked up her trunk and walked out into the snow. There was nowhere to go. The stagecoach wouldn't return for 3 days. She had $47 sewn into the lining of her corset, her entire savings, but even if she could afford a room, the thought of staying at the Timber Rose under the pitying eyes of that clerk was unbearable. She found herself at the edge of town where the buildings gave way to towering Douglas firs. A massive log lay beside the road, waiting to be hauled to the mill. She sat on it, her trunk at her feet, and finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of her situation. 28 years old, unmarried, too tall, too strong, too much of everything that made men feel small. She'd been a fool to believe William Prescott's letters, to think the frontier might be different. Men were the same everywhere they wanted women they could look down upon, literally and figuratively. The snow accumulated on her shoulders and bonnet. Her fingers grew numb inside her gloves. She should move, should find shelter, but the effort seemed pointless. Perhaps she would simply sit here until the cold took her. It would be a slow, quiet ending to a life that had never quite fit anywhere. She didn't hear the footsteps until they stopped directly in front of her. When she looked up, she had to raise her eyes, an unusual experience that made her heart skip strangely. The man standing before her was well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders that strained against his wool coat. Dark hair showed beneath his wide-brimmed hat, and his face was all angles and shadows in the gray afternoon light. He studied her with eyes the color of winter steel, his expression unreadable. "Miss Morgan." His voice was deep, roughened by weather and perhaps tobacco. "Heard there was some trouble at the hotel." She stiffened. Had the entire town already heard of her humiliation? "I don't believe we've been introduced, sir." "Gabriel Blackwood. I manage the North Camp logging operation about 10 miles up the mountain." He paused, seeming to weigh his words. "Also heard Prescott turned fool at the sight of you." "Despite everything." She almost smiled at his phrasing. "Mr. Prescott found my appearance unsuitable for his needs." Prescott's a small man in more ways than one. Blackwood's gaze traveled over her, once assessing, not leering. "You'll freeze to death out here." "That's my business, Mr. Blackwood." "Maybe so, but it'd be a waste." He shifted, snow crunching beneath his boots. "Martha Webb runs a boarding house on Pine Street, clean rooms, fair rates. She's got no patience for fools like Prescott." "I appreciate the suggestion, but you a seamstress, that valise has the look of one who knows needle and thread." The question surprised her. "Yes, how did you know?" "The way you mended your traveling dress where it caught and tore. Good work, almost invisible. Martha's got a room behind her kitchen she uses for sewing. Might could work out an arrangement." He turned to go, then paused. "Pine Street's 2 blocks back. Yellow house with green shutters. Tell her Gabe sent you." He walked away before she could respond, his long stride carrying him quickly into the swirling snow. She sat there a moment longer, processing the strange encounter. Then, because she had no better option and because freezing to death now seemed unnecessarily dramatic, she picked up her trunk and headed back toward town. The yellow house with green shutters sat back from the street, smoke rising cheerfully from its chimney. Through the front window, she could see warm lamplight and the movement of figures inside. She climbed the porch steps and knocked. The woman who answered was short and round, with iron-gray hair and sharp blue eyes that took in Ella's height without flinching. "You'll be the Philadelphia girl Prescott made a fool of himself over. Gabe said you might come by. Mr. Blackwood found me rather quickly." "Not much happens in Silver Creek that Gabe doesn't hear about." Martha stepped aside. "Come in before you catch your death. Supper's in an hour. And you look like you could use a hot meal and a hotter bath." The interior was everything the Timber Rose was not warm. Clean, smelling of beeswax and baking bread. 3 men sat at a long table, playing cards with the easy familiarity of long-term boarders. They glanced up at her entrance, but Martha's glare cut short any comments. "Room and board's $12 a month," Martha said, leading her down a hallway. But Gabe's right, I could use help with mending. These loggers are death on clothes. You take care of the household sewing. I'll knock it down to $6 and throw in supper. She opened a door at the back of the house. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and blessedly a sewing table beneath the window. Late afternoon light, filtered through snow, gave everything a soft, pearl-like glow. "This was my daughter's room," Martha said quietly. "She had clever fingers like you. Been 5 years now since the fever took her." Ella set down her trunk, touching the sewing table gently. Quality tools lay neatly arranged: scissors, thimbles, a pincushion shaped like a strawberry. "It's perfect," she said, and meant it. "Good. You get settled, then come to the kitchen. We'll get you fed and figured out." Martha paused at the door. "And don't you pay no mind to Prescott or any other fool who can't see past their own nose. The frontier's hard enough without folk making it harder for each other." Alone in the room, Ella unpinned her bonnet and shook out her snow-damp hair. Through the window, she could see the forest rising dark and endless beyond the town. Somewhere up there was the north camp where Gabriel Blackwood worked. She thought of his eyes gray as winter storms, but without the cruelty she'd learned to expect from men. Perhaps she would survive Silver Creek after all. Perhaps there was room here for a woman who stood too tall and sewed too well and refused to apologize for either. She opened her trunk and began to unpack, hanging her few dresses on the pegs along the wall. Tomorrow she would face the town's stares and whispers. Tonight, she had a warm room, the promise of work, and the memory of a tall man who'd looked her in the eye without flinching. It wasn't what she'd come for, but it was enough to begin. 2 weeks passed before Ella saw Gabriel Blackwood again. She'd settled into a rhythm at Martha's boarding house, rising before dawn to help with breakfast, spending her days mending the endless stream of torn shirts and ripped trousers the loggers brought in, taking her meals in the kitchen to avoid the stairs in the dining room. The town had accepted her presence with the wary tolerance reserved for oddities. She was the giant seamstress from back east, a curiosity to be whispered about, but ultimately useful enough to be left alone. The general store sold her thread and needles without comment, though Mrs. Henderson always seemed to find urgent business in the back room whenever Ella entered. It was a gray Thursday afternoon, the kind where the clouds pressed low and heavy against the mountains. When the bell above Martha's front door chimed, Ella looked up from the shirt she was patching, one of the dozens that week, to find Gabriel Blackwood filling the doorframe. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair damp with mist. Mrs. Webholm. At the church auxiliary meeting, Ella set down her needle carefully. "She won't return for another hour." He nodded, seeming unsurprised. "Actually came to speak with you." She waited, hands folded in her lap. She'd learned not to fill silences with nervous chatter, especially around men who might mistake courtesy for invitation. "Lost 3 men last week," he said finally. "Not dead quit. Said the clothes were falling apart faster than they could earn money to replace them. Works hard enough without fighting your gear, too." "I'm sorry to hear that." "Don't be sorry. Be interested." He reached into his coat and withdrew a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. "Company provides work clothes, but they're made cheap in Portland, fall apart in weeks. Man spends half his wages keeping himself in decent kit." He laid the bundle on her sewing table and unwrapped it. Inside was a pair of trousers, or what had once been trousers. The heavy canvas was shredded at the knees, torn along the seams, patched and repatched until more thread than fabric remained. This belonged to Eric Svensson, good worker, careful man. These lasted him 3 weeks. Gabriel's gray eyes found hers. "Could you do better?" She examined the garment with professional interest, running her fingers along the failed seams. "The stitching's wrong for work clothes. They've used standard thread, single seams, no reinforcement at stress points." She looked up at him. "Yes, I could do better, but it would cost more than whatever you're paying for these." "How much more?" She calculated quickly. "For proper work pants, double-stitched seams, reinforced knees and seat, heavy thread, Quality canvas, maybe $3 per pair. Your Portland pants probably cost $1. But they'd last. 3 months minimum, likely longer with proper care. He was quiet for a moment, studying her with that unreadable expression she remembered from their first meeting. I've got 30 men at North Camp. Each needs 2 pairs of pants, 2 shirts. Can you handle that? 60 pairs of trousers, 60 shirts. It was more work than she'd done in months. I'd need help, and materials up front. Materials I can manage. As for help... He glanced toward the kitchen. Martha mentioned her niece Sarah might be looking for work. Girl's young but eager. How young? 16. Good family. Just fallen on hard times since her father died. Ella considered. A girl that age could learn quickly, and an extra pair of hands would make the work possible. I'd need to meet her first. Fair enough. He rewrapped the ruined trousers. One more thing. The men won't take kindly to coming here for fittings. Would you be willing to visit the camp? The question hung in the air between them. A respectable woman didn't visit logging camps. Especially not alone. But then again, respectable women didn't stand 6 feet tall or take in mending to survive. With proper escort and during daylight hours, she said carefully. Wouldn't ask otherwise. He moved toward the door, then turned back. Why didn't you go home after Prescott? The question caught her off guard. I beg your pardon. Train runs both ways. You could have gone back to Philadelphia. She met his gaze steadily. There's nothing there for me either. He nodded as if this answer satisfied him. I'll send word about the materials. Good day, Miss Morgan. After he left, she sat in the quiet of the sewing room, staring at the ruined trousers he had left behind. Martha found her there an hour later, still studying the failed seams. Gabe Blackwood came by, the older woman said, settling heavily into the spare chair. He offered me work, making clothes for his logging crew. Martha's eyebrows rose. Did he now? That's not like Gabe, taking interest in domestic arrangements. She peered at Ella shrewdly. What did you tell him? That I'd need help. He mentioned your niece Sarah. Sarah's a good girl, quick learner, steady hands. Could use the work too her mother takes in washing, but it's barely enough. Martha paused. You know what you're considering, don't you? Working for a logging camp, even with Gabe's protection, it'll mark you different. I'm already different. This is another kind of different, the kind that makes proper ladies cross the street to avoid you. Ella smiled without humor. They already do that. Martha sighed. Well then, I suppose you've got nothing to lose. But Ella... She leaned forward. Gabe Blackwood's a good man, but he's got his own shadows. Lost his wife 5 years back, same fever that took my Amy. He hasn't been quite right since. Keeps to himself up at that camp. Rarely comes to town except for business. He's been kind to me. That's what worries me. Gabe doesn't do kind without reason. Martha stood, brushing imaginary dust from her skirts. Still, work is work. I'll send word to Sarah. She can be here tomorrow if you'll have her. The next morning, Ella woke to find 3 large boxes on Martha's front porch. Inside was canvas good quality, tightly woven along with spools of heavy thread, packets of needles, and a note in angular handwriting. For samples, rest to follow if terms are acceptable. GB. Sarah Hartley arrived as Ella was sorting through the materials. She was a slight girl with brown braids and worried eyes, clutching a letter of introduction from her mother. Her dress was carefully mended good work that spoke of pride despite poverty. My mother says you're the seamstress from Philadelphia, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. She says you might have work for me. Can you sew a straight seam? Yes, ma'am. Mama taught me. Ella handed her a piece of canvas and pointed to the sewing table. Show me. The girl's stitches were careful, even showing promise if not yet expertise. More importantly, she didn't chatter or fidget, keeping her attention on the work. When she finished, she looked up anxiously. You'll do, Ella said, and was rewarded with the first smile she'd seen from the girl. We'll start with simple tasks: cutting, pinning, basting. Watch everything I do. Ask questions if you don't understand. And Sarah, what's said in this room stays in this room. Mr. Blackwood's business is not gossip fodder. Yes, ma'am, I understand. They worked through the morning, Ella cutting out the first pair of sample trousers while Sarah watched intently. By noon, they'd established a rhythm, Ella explaining each step, Sarah absorbing the information with surprising quickness. Gabriel arrived as the church bells chimed 3 o'clock. He knocked this time, waiting for permission to enter the sewing room. His eyes took in the scene: Ella at the main table, Sarah at the smaller one, fabric pieces arranged in neat piles. Miss Hartley, he greeted Sarah, who blushed and mumbled a response. To Ella, he said, how long for a sample? 2 days for a complete outfit, trousers and shirt. I want to make sure the design is right before we proceed. Fair enough. When it's ready, I'll take you to the camp for fittings. He glanced at Sarah. Both of you. Propriety satisfied. Miss Morgan. There was something in his tone, not mockery exactly, but an acknowledgement of the game they were all playing, pretending that propriety mattered when survival was at stake. Perfectly, Mr. Blackwood. He left without further conversation, but Ella caught him glancing back through the window as he walked away. Sarah, apparently bolder than she appeared, giggled softly. He's sweet on you. Don't be ridiculous. Ella's voice was sharper than intended. Mr. Blackwood is a business associate, nothing more. My papa used to look at Mama like that, before the accident. Sarah's voice went soft, like she was something unexpected but welcome. Ella said nothing, bending over her work, but later, as twilight painted the sewing room in shades of purple and gold, she found herself thinking of gray eyes that didn't look away, of a voice that spoke to her directly instead of over or around her. She shook her head and focused on the seam before her. She'd come to Silver Creek for a new life, not new complications. Gabriel Blackwood might be different from men like William Prescott, but different didn't mean safe. She'd learned that lesson long ago. The taller you stood, the harder you fell. Still, as she worked into the evening, Sarah humming softly beside her, she couldn't quite dismiss the warmth that had bloomed when he'd said her name. Miss Morgan. Spoken low and careful, like something worth protecting. Outside, snow began to fall again, muffling the sounds of the town settling into night. Somewhere up the mountain, Gabriel Blackwood was probably watching the same snow, perhaps thinking of the tall seamstress who'd agreed to clothe his men. Or perhaps not. Perhaps she was spinning stories from nothing, seeing meaning where none existed. But when she finally banked the fire and prepared for bed, she carefully folded the note he'd sent with the materials, placing it between the pages of her Bible. For samples. It read. Nothing more. But she'd noticed how carefully he'd formed each letter, how the paper smelled faintly of pine and wood smoke. Tomorrow she would begin the real work, proving her worth through needle and thread. But tonight, she allowed herself this small foolishness, a carefully folded note, and the memory of a man who had to look up to meet her eyes. The sample trousers and shirt were ready in 2 days as promised. Ella had worked late into both nights, her fingers flying over the heavy canvas, reinforcing every seam that might face strain. Sarah had proven invaluable, her young eyes sharp for detail, her hands steady with the pressing iron. When Gabriel arrived to collect them, he brought an unexpected companion, a massive man with shoulders like a barn door and gentle eyes that seemed at odds with his imposing frame. This is Anders Lindstrom, Gabriel said by way of introduction. Best logger in 3 counties and about the biggest man we've got. Figure if the clothes fit him, they'll fit anyone. Anders ducked his head shyly, his face reddening. Pleased to meet you, miss. His Swedish accent rolled thick over the words. Gabe says you make clothes that won't fall apart. That's the intention. Mr. Lindstrom. Ella gestured to the samples laid out on the table. Would you mind trying these on? There's a screen in the corner for privacy. While Anders changed, Gabriel examined the construction of a second shirt Ella had been working on. His fingers traced the reinforced seams with obvious appreciation. Double-felled seams, he noted. That's quality work. It takes longer, but they'll hold. I've also reinforced the elbows and shoulders where the fabric takes the most wear. You know your craft. He set the shirt down carefully. Where did you train? My mother was a seamstress. I learned at her knee. She didn't mention the years after her mother's death, working in Philadelphia factories where speed mattered more than skill, where tall girls were stationed at the cutting tables because they could reach farther. Anders emerged from behind the screen, and Ella had to admit a moment of professional pride. The clothes fit him well, the trousers sitting properly at his waist, the shirt accommodating his broad shoulders without pulling. How do they feel? She asked, circling him to check the fit. Like they were made for me. Anders flexed his arms experimentally. Don't buy nowhere. Try sitting, Gabriel suggested. Squatting too, like you're setting a choker chain. Anders complied, moving through the positions a logger might face during a day's work. The clothes moved with him, the reinforced areas holding firm. By God. Anders breathed. Excuse my language, miss, but these are finer than anything I've worn. Gabriel nodded, satisfied. We'll take the full order. When can you start? Ella glanced at Sarah, who was practically vibrating with excitement. Give us a week to cut all the pieces, then we can begin assembly. But I'll need those measurements. When would you like us to visit the camp? Saturday morning, if that suits. I'll send a wagon. After the men left, Sarah couldn't contain herself any longer. 60 orders, Miss Morgan. That's more money than my family's seen in months. It's also more work than you can imagine, Ella warned, but she was smiling. We'll need to be organized. Each man's measurements recorded carefully, every piece labeled. She was interrupted by Martha bustling in with tea and cookies, her face bright with curiosity. Well, how did it go? We have the contract, Ella said simply. Martha clapped her hands. Oh, this calls for something stronger than tea. Wait here. She hurried out, returning with a bottle of elderberry wine and 3 glasses. Sarah, just a sip for you. Your mother won't thank me for sending you home tipsy. As they toasted their success, Ella felt something she hadn't experienced in years: hope. Real, tangible hope that she might build something here, might find a place where her height and skill were assets rather than liabilities. Saturday dawned clear and cold, frost painting elaborate patterns on the windows. The promised wagon arrived at 8 sharp, driven by a taciturn man who introduced himself as Ezra Pike. Sarah sat beside Ella on the bench, clutching her measuring tape and notebook like talismans. The road to North Camp wound upward through forests so dense they blocked out the sun. Giant Douglas firs rose like cathedral columns, their bases wider than the wagon. The air grew colder as they climbed, scented with pine and the sharp tang of snow. I've never been this far from town, Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with wonder. Neither had Ella, but she kept that to herself. She was supposed to be the steady one, the experienced one. Inside, her stomach churned with nerves. The camp appeared suddenly as they rounded a bend, a collection of long, low buildings arranged around a central yard where massive logs lay waiting for transport. Men moved between the buildings, their breath steaming in the cold air. The sound of axes rang from the forest beyond. Gabriel met them at what appeared to be the main office, a slightly larger building with actual glass windows. Miss Morgan? Miss Hartley. Welcome to North Camp. He helped them down from the wagon, his hand lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary on Ella's elbow. I've set up in the mess hall. The men are eager to get measured word spread about Anders's new clothes. The mess hall smelled of coffee and bacon grease, with long tables scarred by years of use. Gabriel had cleared one end, setting up a makeshift measuring station with a privacy screen borrowed from somewhere. "I've made lists," he said, producing papers covered in his angular writing. 32 men total. I hired 2 new ones this week. They'll come in shifts so work doesn't stop entirely. The first group filed in with the curious shyness of men unaccustomed to female company. They ranged from boys barely older than Sarah to grizzled veterans with gray in their beards. Some were tall, others short and stocky, but all bore the marks of hard labor-scarred hands, weathered faces, the particular way of moving that spoke of constant physical work. Ella had expected resistance, perhaps crude comments about her height or presence in their domain. Instead, she found unexpected respect. Word of Anders's clothes had indeed spread, and these men were tired of throwing away money on gear that couldn't survive their work. "Stand naturally," she instructed each man. "Arms at your sides. Sarah will take the measurements while I record them." The system worked smoothly. Sarah, after her initial nervousness, proved efficient and professional. She called out numbers in a clear voice while Ella noted them in her ledger. Adding observations, this man's right shoulder dropped lower. That one favored his left leg. During a break between shifts, Gabriel appeared with coffee and sandwiches. "You're doing well. The men are impressed." "They're very polite," Ella observed, accepting the coffee gratefully. "I run a respectful camp. Man can't work properly if he's worrying about foolishness." He paused. "Though I'll admit, I warned them specifically about proper behavior today." "Threatened them, more like," said a cheerful voice. Anders Lindstrom entered, still wearing his new clothes. "Told us any man who disrespected the seamstress ladies would be mucking out the privy until spring." Gabriel didn't deny it. A man protects what's valuable to his operation. Ella felt heat rise in her cheeks and busied herself with her ledger. Sarah, less subtle, giggled behind her hand. The afternoon shift brought more of the same measurements, notes, quiet observations of men who lived hard and died young in pursuit of timber. One man, introduced as Tom Harper, could barely stand still for shaking. "Got the tremors," he explained apologetically. "Tree kicked back wrong last winter. Hurt my back something fierce. Makes my hands shake now." Ella made a note to add extra padding to his shirts, something to ease the constant pain he clearly endured. It was a small thing, but she saw the gratitude in his eyes when she mentioned it. By late afternoon, they'd measured every man in camp. Ella's ledger was full of numbers and notes, a blueprint for 60 sets of clothes that would need to withstand everything the wilderness could offer. "This is impressive," Gabriel said, reviewing her notes while the men returned to work. "You've thought of things. I wouldn't have extra pockets for this man who keeps tools. Longer sleeves for Eric, who's sensitive to sawdust. Clothes should fit the life being lived in them." Ella replied, "No point making everything identical when the men aren't." He looked at her then with an expression she couldn't quite read, something between admiration and curiosity. "You see people clearly. It's part of the job." "No," he said quietly. "It's part of you." Before she could respond, Ezra appeared to say the wagon was ready. The ride back to town was quieter. Sarah dozed against Ella's shoulder, worn out by the excitement. The forest was painted gold and purple by the setting sun, beautiful and dangerous in equal measure. As they reached the outskirts of Silver Creek, Ella found herself already planning which pieces to cut first, how to organize the work, whether they'd need more thread. The magnitude of the task ahead should have frightened her. Instead, she felt energized, purposeful in a way she hadn't in years. "Thank you for today," she told Gabriel as he helped them down at Martha's gate. "Thank you for coming. The men," he paused, seeming to search for words. "They don't get much kindness. What you did today, treating them like individuals worth remembering, it matters." He climbed back onto the wagon before she could answer, but she stood at the gate watching until he disappeared around the corner. Sarah, suddenly wide awake, tugged at her sleeve. "He's definitely sweet on you." "Hush," Ella said, but without heat, inside. Something warm unfurled in her chest, not quite hope, Not quite desire, but something that might grow into either given time and care. Martha met them at the door, eager for news. Over dinner, they regaled her with stories of the camp, the men, the sheer scale of forest and mountain. But Ella kept some details to herself, the way Gabriel's eyes softened when he spoke of his men, how his hand had felt steady and sure on her elbow, the quiet promise in his words. A man protects what's valuable. That night, she lay in her narrow bed listening to wind in the trees, thinking of clothes yet to be made and eyes the color of winter steel. Somewhere up the mountain, 32 men slept in their drafty bunkhouse, dreaming perhaps of clothes that wouldn't fall apart, sewn by the tall seamstress from Philadelphia who'd treated them like they mattered. And in his own quarters, though she couldn't know it, Gabriel Blackwood sat by his window, watching stars appear above the tree line, thinking of competent hands and clear eyes and the way she'd said clothes should fit the life being lived in them, like it was the simplest truth in the world. The contract was just the beginning. They all sensed it, though none yet had words for what was starting to grow between the careful stitches and measured seams, something as strong as double-felled seams, as enduring as the forest itself. Spring arrived slowly in Silver Creek, creeping up the mountain in shades of green while snow still clung to the highest peaks. By April, Ella Morgan had become as much a fixture in the town as the church steeple or the mill whistle that marked the changing shifts. The giant seamstress, they still called her, but the words had lost their sting. The women who once crossed the street to avoid her now nodded politely, some even bringing their own mending to Martha's boarding house. Success, it seemed, made even the unusual acceptable. The contract with North Camp had transformed more than just her financial situation. The sewing room now hummed with constant activity. Sarah had proven so capable that Ella had hired her full-time, and they'd even taken on Martha's other niece, young Bethany, to help with simple tasks. Bolts of canvas and wool filled every corner, and the cutting table Gabriel had built for them dominated the center of the room. "Miss Morgan," Sarah called from the front window one afternoon, "there's a crowd gathering at the general store." Ella set down the shirt she was hemming and joined her assistant. Sure enough, a cluster of people had formed on the boardwalk, their voices carrying excitement and concern in equal measure. "What do you suppose?" Sarah began, but was interrupted by Bethany bursting through the door. "Miss Morgan, they're saying you're a fraud. That lady from Portland is calling you terrible things." Ella's stomach tightened. "What lady?" "Oh, Mrs. Pemberton. She owns a big sewing factory, and she's telling everyone you stole her designs, that you're charging too much, that proper ladies don't work for logging camps." "Bethany, breathe." Ella placed steadying hands on the girl's shoulders. "Where is Mrs. Pemberton now?" "At the store, holding court like she owns the place. Mr. Henderson's just standing there letting her talk." Sarah was already reaching for her shawl. "We should go. Defend ourselves." "No." Ella's voice was firm. "We continue working. Let Mrs. Pemberton exhaust herself with talk. Our work speaks for itself." But her hands trembled slightly as she returned to her sewing. She'd known this success couldn't last without challenge. In her experience, there was always someone ready to tear down what others built. An hour later, the shop bell chimed. Ella looked up, expecting Martha or perhaps a curious townsperson. Instead, William Prescott stood in the doorway, his weak chin lifted in an attempt at authority. Beside him stood a woman in an expensive Portland dress, her pinched face radiating disapproval. "Miss Morgan," Prescott began. "This is Mrs. Cornelius Pemberton. She has some concerns about your enterprise." Mrs. Pemberton swept into the room as if she owned it, her sharp eyes cataloging everything. "So, this is the operation that's stealing business from legitimate establishments." Her voice dripped disdain. "I must say, it's even more irregular than I was led to believe." Ella stood slowly, using her full height at the cutting table. Sarah and Bethany had frozen like rabbits sensing a hawk. I wasn't aware I was stealing anything. Mrs. Pemberton, I make clothes for loggers. I doubt that interferes with your Portland factory. You've undercut the natural order, the woman snapped. These camps have contracts with established suppliers. You've disrupted those relationships with your amateur efforts. My amateur efforts have kept 32 men in clothes that last longer than 3 weeks. If that disrupts your business, perhaps you should examine the quality of your products.
Mrs.
Pemberton's face flushed.
How dare you?
What's this about? Gabriel Blackwood filled the doorway, his presence immediately changing the room's dynamics. His eyes took in the scene, Prescott shrinking back, Mrs. Pemberton puffing with indignation, Ella standing tall and defensive.
Mr. Blackwood,
Prescott stammered. We were just discussing.
I heard the discussion from the street.
Gabriel's voice was dangerously quiet. Mrs. Pemberton was explaining how Miss Morgan has disrupted the natural order. Exactly, Mrs. Pemberton seized on his words. Surely you can see the impropriety. A single woman working closely with rough men. It's simply not proper. Gabriel stepped fully into the room, and suddenly it seemed smaller. Like selling loggers clothes that fall apart in weeks, like charging premium prices for goods barely worth the thread they're sewn with. I don't have to stand here and be insulted by—
No, you don't.
His tone was final. In fact, I suggest you leave. Now. Mrs. Pemberton's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. William, are you going to allow this? Prescott was already backing toward the door. I think, that is, perhaps we should—
Coward,
she spat, then turned her venom on Ella. This isn't over. I have connections, influence. I'll make sure every respectable establishment knows exactly what kind of woman you are. They already know, Ella said quietly. I'm the kind who does honest work for honest pay. If that threatens you, perhaps you should examine why.
Mrs.
Pemberton swept out in a fury of silk and indignation, Prescott scurrying after her. The room fell silent except for Bethany's nervous giggle. Well, Sarah breathed. That was exciting. Gabriel hadn't moved from his position near the door. His eyes found Ella's. You all right? She realized her hands were shaking and clasped them together. Fine, though I suspect this won't be the end of it. No, it won't. He moved to the cutting table, running his hand along its smooth surface. Pemberton's company has the contract for 3 camps east of here. She'll make trouble if she can. I won't stop working because some Portland socialite feels threatened. Didn't expect you would. A slight smile touched his lips. But you might consider expanding. If you had contracts with other camps, it would be harder for her to paint you as some irregular operation. Sarah perked up. We could handle more work, couldn't we? Miss Morgan with maybe another girl or 2. Ella's mind was already racing. More contracts meant more security, but also more exposure. More reasons for people like Mrs. Pemberton to attack. I know the managers at Riverside and Pine Ridge camps, Gabriel continued. Good men who'd appreciate quality work. If you're interested, I could arrange meetings. She studied him, this quiet man who kept appearing at crucial moments. Why are you helping me? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, because you see people, not just bodies to hang clothes on, but individuals. Tom Harper told me about the extra padding you added to his shirts. Small thing to you, maybe, but he's sleeping better than he has in months. It was just kind, he finished. You were kind when you didn't have to be. That's rare out here. He moved toward the door, then paused. Also, I don't like bullies. Never have. After he left, the 3 women worked in contemplative silence for a while. Finally, Bethany burst out. Is it true what they say, that Mr. Blackwood killed a man? Bethany, Sarah scolded. That's gossip. Everyone says it, though. Says that's why his wife left him. Couldn't stand living with a killer. His wife died, Ella said sharply. Of fever. And gossip is poison. Bethany, we don't spread it in this shop. The girl subsided, chastened. But Ella found herself thinking of Gabriel's eyes when he'd faced down Mrs. Pemberton, cold, dangerous, protective. Perhaps there was truth to the gossip. Perhaps there were depths to Gabriel Blackwood she couldn't fathom. That evening, Martha bustled in with news. That Pemberton woman's been all over town, spreading tales. Says you're running some sort of inappropriate establishment. Says you go to the camps unchaperoned. I always take Sarah or Bethany. Facts don't matter to people like her. Martha settled her bulk into the spare chair. But here's the interesting part. Mrs. Chen from the laundry stood up to her. Said you were the only seamstress in town who'd take her family's business. Then Anna Schmidt from the bakery chimed in. Said you'd never looked down on her for her accent. Ella blinked, surprised. She hadn't realized anyone had noticed. You've made more friends than you know, Martha continued. This town's full of people who don't quite fit the proper mold. They recognize their own. Later, as Ella prepared for bed, she found herself at the window, gazing toward the dark line of forest. Somewhere up there. Gabriel Blackwood was probably finishing his day's work, checking on his men, maintaining the careful order of his camp. She thought of his words. You were kind when you didn't have to be. Such a simple thing, yet he'd spoken it like a revelation. The next morning brought a surprise. Anna Schmidt arrived with fresh bread and a proposition. My nephew Otto just came from Germany. He's a tailor, trained proper. Needs work. Maybe you could use another pair of hands. By noon, 3 more people had come by a woman whose daughter was clever with a needle. A man whose logging days were over but whose hands were still steady. And Tom Harper's wife, offering to take in piecework. It's like the whole town wants to help. Sarah marveled. Ella understood. Mrs. Pemberton had made a crucial error. She'd attacked not just Ella, but the idea that someone different could succeed in a town full of immigrants, widows, crippled loggers, and others who didn't fit Portland society's narrow mold. That was a challenge they couldn't ignore. By week's end, Ella had hired 2 more seamstresses and set up an arrangement with 3 women to do piecework from home. Orders had come in from Riverside Camp, just as Gabriel had predicted. The sewing room was bursting at the seams, and Martha was already talking about expanding into the adjoining storage room. Mrs. Pemberton made one last attempt, arriving with a lawyer who spoke of contracts and territories and legal consequences. Ella listened politely, then produced her own documents, simple contracts, properly witnessed, completely legal. You see, Mr. Whitman, the lawyer supplied, looking uncomfortable. Mr. Whitman, I'm not interfering with any existing contracts. I'm simply providing a service that was needed. She smiled, the expression sharp. Unless Mrs. Pemberton is suggesting she owns exclusive rights to clothing every logger in Oregon. The lawyer muttered something about reviewing the situation and beat a hasty retreat. Mrs. Pemberton, trailing behind in defeat. That evening, as Ella tallied the week's orders, she realized something had shifted. She was no longer just the giant seamstress from back east. She was Miss Morgan, who employed 6 women and kept 3 logging camps in decent clothes, who stood up to Portland bullies and treated everyone with the same courteous professionalism. She'd become, without quite meaning to, exactly what she'd claimed to be a woman who did honest work for honest pay. And in a town built on the labor of those deemed too rough, too foreign, too different for polite society, that was its own kind of power. The bell chimed, and Gabriel entered, hat in hand. Heard you had an interesting week. You could say that. He set a bottle on her desk. Good whiskey, from the look of it. Thought you might need this. Congratulations on surviving your first Portland society assault. She laughed, surprised. Is that what it was? First of many, Probably. Success makes enemies. He paused at the door. But you've got something they don't. What's that? People who see what you really are. His smile was slight but warm. Giant seamstress is starting to sound like a compliment. After he left, Ella sat in the lamp-lit room, surrounded by fabric and thread and the tangible evidence of her growing enterprise. Through the window, she could see lights beginning to twinkle across Silver Creek, her town now, for better or worse. She was still too tall, still unmarried, still everything a proper lady shouldn't be. But she was also employed, respected, and building something that mattered. And if that required facing down a few more misses, Pembertons, so be it. The giant seamstress had work to do. The harvest dance was Silver Creek's grandest affair. Marking the end of logging season before winter set in hard, the whole town threw itself into preparation bunting strung between buildings. The church hall swept and polished, ladies airing out their best dresses. Ella had not planned to attend. Dances were for courting couples and established families, not spinster seamstresses who towered over most of the men. But Martha would hear none of it. "You've been in this town nearly a year," she declared, holding up a length of deep green silk. "You've earned your place. Time you showed these folks you're more than just needle and thread." "I have nothing suitable to wear," Ella protested weakly. "Then make something. Lord knows you've got the skill." Martha's eyes twinkled. "Besides, I heard from Anna Schmidt that a certain camp manager has been asking whether you'll be there." Ella felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Gabriel Blackwood has no interest in—" "Gabriel Blackwood has been finding excuses to visit this shop twice a week since spring. Man doesn't need that many shirts." Ella. It was true. Gabriel had become a regular presence, bringing small orders, checking on progress, lingering to discuss everything from timber prices to philosophy. Their conversations had evolved from cautious professionalism to something warmer, though neither had acknowledged the shift. Sarah and Bethany took up the cause with enthusiasm. "Oh, Miss Morgan, you must go," Sarah exclaimed. "We could make you the most beautiful dress." "I'm too old for beautiful," Ella said firmly, "and too tall for dancing." "Nonsense," Bethany chimed in. "You're only 29, and Mr. Blackwood is certainly tall enough." In the end, Ella capitulated. They worked together on the dress in stolen moments, green silk that complemented her dark hair. A simple but elegant design that emphasized her height rather than trying to disguise it. The neckline was modest but flattering. The sleeves fitted. The skirt full enough for dancing but not so wide as to be impractical. The night of the dance came crisp and clear. Stars scattered across the October sky like spilled salt. Ella stood before her small mirror, hands trembling slightly as she pinned up her hair. "You look like a queen," Sarah breathed from the doorway. She and Bethany had come to help, armed with ribbons and encouragement. "I look like a governess playing dress-up," Ella corrected, but without real conviction. The dress did suit her, made her height seem stately rather than awkward. Martha appeared with a wool shawl. "There'll be talk," she warned. "You walking in there, looking like that, without a proper escort." "Let them talk. I'm going to support the community, nothing more." But her heart was beating too fast as they walked to the church hall. Sarah and Bethany flanking her like excited guards. Music spilled from the open doors, fiddle and accordion. The sound of boots on wooden floors. Laughter and conversation. The hall was transformed, lit by dozens of lanterns. Autumn leaves and late wildflowers decorating every surface. The entire town seemed to be there, loggers in their Sunday best. Wives in carefully preserved finery. Children darting between adults' legs. Conversation stuttered as Ella entered. She felt the weight of eyes, heard the whispers start. But before anxiety could take hold, Anna Schmidt bustled over. "Miss Morgan, how wonderful you look, come. You must try my apple cake." Others followed Anna's lead women, whose clothes she'd mended. Men from the camps, who nodded respectfully. Children who weren't afraid of her height because she always kept penny candy in her shop for small customers. She was beginning to relax when the crowd parted and William Prescott appeared, a blonde woman on his arm. His wife, Ella realized, finally arrived from wherever she'd been waiting. "Miss Morgan," he said stiffly, "I don't believe you've met my wife, Constance." Constance Prescott was everything Ella wasn't petite, conventionally pretty, with the kind of delicate features men wrote poetry about. Her blue eyes traveled up Ella's form with barely concealed amazement. "My goodness," she said in a tinkling voice. "William told me you were tall, but I hadn't quite imagined. How do you find dancing partners?" The words were delivered with sweet concern, but the insult was clear. Around them, people pretended not to listen while hanging on every word. "I manage well enough," Ella replied calmly, though her cheeks burned. "How brave of you to come alone. I do so admire independent women." Constance's smile was sharp as broken glass. "Though I suppose at your age, independence is more necessity than choice." William tugged at his wife's arm, clearly uncomfortable. "Come, dear, the music's starting." They swept away, leaving Ella standing alone in a circle of awkward silence. This had been a mistake. She should leave, return to her room where height and age and aloneness didn't matter. "Miss Morgan." She turned to find Gabriel Blackwood standing behind her, dressed in a black suit that emphasized his broad shoulders. His gray eyes took in her appearance with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Mr. Blackwood," her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Would you honor me with a dance?" The question hung between them, loaded with more meaning than 5 simple words should carry. Around them, the whispers intensified. The camp manager and the seamstress, what a pairing that would be. "I'm not much of a dancer," she said quietly. "And as Mrs. Prescott so kindly noted, I'm rather tall for a partner. I've never been bothered by heights." He offered his hand, steady and sure. "And I'm willing to risk my toes if you are." She looked at his outstretched hand, aware of the entire room watching. This would cement her reputation, for better or worse. The independent seamstress who danced with the mysterious camp manager, who stood eye to eye with him and didn't apologize for it. She took his hand. He led her onto the dance floor as a waltz began, placing one hand at her waist with careful propriety. They fit well together, her height complementing his, moving in sync as if they'd done this before. "You're full of surprises," she said as they turned. "I wouldn't have taken you for a dancer." "My wife loved to dance." The words came easily, without the sharp edge of grief she'd heard before. "She was small, barely came to my shoulder. Used to joke that dancing with me was like being carried by a friendly tree." Ella smiled at the image. "She sounds lovely." She would have liked you. Even though I'm scandalously tall and work for logging camps. Especially because of that. Margaret appreciated people who didn't fit the mold. He guided her through a turn, his hand warm through the silk of her dress. "She was a doctor's daughter who insisted on learning to shoot and ride. Shocked her whole family by marrying a logger." What happened to her? The question slipped out before Ella could stop it. "I'm sorry, that's not—" "Fever, 5 years ago. Same one that took Martha's daughter and half the town?" His voice was steady, matter of fact. "I went a little wild after. That's when I—" He stopped, jaw tightening. "When you killed a man," Ella kept her voice low. Matter of fact, as his had been. His step faltered slightly. "You heard that story?" "Everyone's heard that story. Several versions of it." They danced in silence for a moment. Around them, other couples swirled, but Ella was aware only of Gabriel's hand at her waist, the controlled strength in his movements. "It was a man from the camp," he said finally. "Drunk, mean drunk. Started beating one of the younger boys. Wouldn't stop. I pulled him off. We fought. He hit his head on a rock when he fell." He met her eyes. "I'm not sorry he's dead. Only sorry I was the one who had to do it." She nodded. accepting this piece of his past. The boy. Tommy Chen. Works at his family's laundry now. Good kid. They completed another circuit of the floor. Ella was aware of eyes following them, some scandalized, some approving, some simply curious. William Prescott watched from the corner, his pretty wife forgotten as he stared at the woman he'd rejected dancing with a better man than he'd ever be. "They're all watching," she murmured. "Let them." Gabriel's hand tightened slightly at her waist. "You're the most interesting thing to happen to this town in years." Interesting. What every woman longs to hear. He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his stern features. Also brilliant, talented, kind, beautiful. He paused. Too good for a roughneck camp manager with blood on his hands. Her breath caught. "Gabriel, I know what I am. Ella, what I've done. But I also know I've been looking for excuses to see you since the day you sat on that log in the snow. Too proud to cry." His voice dropped lower. "You want to know why I really helped you? Because you looked at me like I was a person, not a tragedy or a threat. Do you know how long it's been since someone did that?" The music was ending. Around them, couples were separating, applauding the musicians. But Gabriel didn't release her, and she didn't step away. "I'm not an easy woman," she said quietly. "I'm set in my ways. Proud, too tall, too independent." "You're perfect." The words were simple, certain, just as you are. Someone cleared their throat nearby Martha, appearing with strategic timing. "Ella, dear Mrs. Chen wants to speak with you about winter coats for her boys." The spell broken, they separated. Gabriel bowed slightly. "Thank you for the dance, Miss Morgan." "Thank you for asking, Mr. Blackwood." He melted back into the crowd, but she felt his presence for the rest of the evening. Other men asked her to dance, emboldened by Gabriel's example, or curious about the seamstress who'd caught his eye. She danced with Anders Lindstrom, who towered over even her, with Tom Harper, who moved carefully but determinedly, with young Otto Schmidt, who chattered nervously in German-accented English about tailoring techniques. But it was that first dance she carried home with her, the memory of Gabriel's hand at her waist, his voice saying perfect like he meant it. Sarah and Bethany peppered her with questions as they walked home, but Ella barely heard them. Something had shifted tonight, some careful boundary crossed. The town had seen them together, would draw its own conclusions. More importantly, she'd seen him not just the grieving widower or the dangerous man of rumors, but Gabriel himself, complicated, honorable, drawn to her not despite her differences, but because of them. At her window that night, still in the green silk dress, she watched snow begin to fall the first of the season, covering Silver Creek in pristine white, somewhere in the darkness. Gabriel was probably watching the same snow, thinking perhaps of a dance, of words spoken while violins played. "Perfect," he'd said, "just as you are." For the first time in her life, Ella Morgan began to believe that might be true. The accident happened on a Tuesday in November, when snow lay thick on the mountains and the logging crews worked frantically to meet winter quotas. Ella was reviewing orders with Sarah when young Tommy Chen burst through the shop door, his face white with fear. "Miss Morgan, you must come, Mr. Blackwood. There's been an accident at the camp." The shears slipped from Ella's suddenly numb fingers. "What happened?" "Widowmaker branch came down wrong, pushed Mr. Blackwood into Jackson when he tried to save him. They're both hurt bad. Dr. Morrison's already headed up. But..." The boy was near tears. "They're asking for you, Miss Morgan. Mr. Blackwood is... Keep saying your name." Ella was already reaching for her cloak. "Sarah, gather the medical supplies from the back shelf. Bethany, run to Martha, tell her what's happened and that we need her emergency kit." "You can't go up there," Sarah protested. "The snow, the roads." "I'm going." Her voice brooked no argument. "Tommy, how did you get here?" "Took one of the work sleds. It's outside, but the going's rough."
I can manage.
She was already moving, gathering supplies with hands that wanted to shake.
How bad is it? Tell me true.
Tommy's young face crumpled. Real bad. Miss, the branch caught Mr. Blackwood across the back and shoulder. Jackson's leg is crushed. There was a lot of blood. Within minutes, Ella was on the sled beside Tommy. Her medical supplies and sewing kit clutched tight. The boy drove the horses hard up the mountain road. Snow spraying from the runners. The journey seemed endless, each curve revealing more forest, more mountain, more distance from help. She'd made this trip dozens of times now, but never like this. Never with her heart hammering against her ribs and Gabriel's name a prayer on her lips. The memory of their dance kept intruding his hand at her waist, his voice calling her perfect. What if those were the last words they'd share? The camp appeared through the driving snow, but instead of its usual bustle, an eerie quiet prevailed. Men stood in clusters, hats in hands, faces grave. They parted as the sled approached, and Ella saw the fear in their eyes, the look of men facing mortality in a place where death came easy. This way. Anders Lindstrom appeared. His massive frame somehow diminished. We moved them to the main office warmest building. Ella followed, her boots slipping on packed snow. Inside, Dr. Morrison worked over 2 still forms by the stove, the metallic scent of blood mixed with wood smoke and the sharp tang of carbolic. Miss Morgan. The doctor looked up, surprise flickering across his weathered features. This is no place for...
Mr. Blackwood asked for me.
She moved closer, her breath catching at what she saw. Gabriel lay on his stomach, his shirt cut away to reveal a dark, spreading bruise across his back and shoulder. His eyes were closed, face pale as the snow outside. He's been in and out of consciousness, Dr. Morrison said quietly. The branch caught him here. He indicated the worst of the bruising. Knocked him into Jackson there. I've done what I can, but... Ella looked at the other injured man, Luke Jackson. She remembered. One of the newer hires. His leg was splinted, face twisted in pain but aware. Will they live? She kept her voice steady through sheer force of will. Jackson will, though he'll likely limp. As for Blackwood, the doctor's face was grim. The blow was severe. Could be internal damage I can't see, and the cold's not helping. We need to keep him warm, still, and pray nothing's broken inside. Then we'll do that. Ella removed her cloak, rolling up her sleeves. What do you need from me? Can you sew flesh as well as cloth? I need to close some of these cuts, and my eyes aren't what they were. She'd never sewn human skin, but her hands were steady with years of precision work. Show me! The next hours blurred together following the doctor's instructions, cleaning wounds, stitching careful sutures while trying not to think about whose skin lay beneath her needle. The men brought hot water, clean cloths, anything requested. She was dimly aware of their presence, these rough loggers who moved with surprising gentleness around their injured boss. Gabriel stirred only once during the procedure, his gray eyes finding hers with effort.
Ella.
His voice was barely a whisper.
I'm here.
She touched his face gently. Propriety forgotten. Rest now. Save your strength. Knew you'd come. His eyes drifted closed. Always do what's needed. Night fell without anyone noticing. The storm picked up, rattling the windows and piling snow against the walls. Dr. Morrison finally straightened, wiping his hands. I've done what I can. Now we wait. He glanced at Ella, who hadn't moved from Gabriel's side. Someone should stay with them tonight. Watch for fever, changes in breathing. I'll stay.
Miss Morgan, that's hardly...
I'll stay, she repeated firmly.
You're needed in town. Doctor, if the storm worsens, others might need help.
I can manage here. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Anders will show you where supplies are kept. If Blackwood's breathing changes, or if fever sets in hard, send someone for me immediately. After he left, fighting through the storm, Ella found herself alone with the injured men and the weight of responsibility. Anders brought blankets, a pot of coffee, and awkward comfort. "He's strong," the big Swede said. "Seen him take worse and walk away." But they both knew this was different. The widowmaker, a dead branch hanging precariously in the forest canopy, had earned its name honestly. When they fell, they killed without discrimination. Ella settled beside Gabriel's still form, one hand resting lightly on his uninjured shoulder to monitor his breathing. Jackson dozed fitfully across the room, aided by the laudanum the doctor had left. The hours crawled past. She kept the stove fed, changed cool cloths on Gabriel's forehead when he grew warm, spoke quietly to him about anything that came to mind, the new wool shipment, Sarah's improving skills, town gossip he'd pretend not to care about but always listen to with hidden interest. "You can't leave now," she told his unconscious form during the long stretch past midnight. "Not when I'm finally starting to believe you might actually find me perfect. Stubborn man, making me care about you." Near dawn, his fever spiked. She worked frantically, following the doctor's instructions, bathing him with cool water while the storm howled outside. His breathing grew labored, and she found herself praying, bargaining with God, promising anything if he just let this good man live. When the fever finally broke, she was exhausted, kneeling beside him with her head resting on the edge of his makeshift bed. A hand in her hair woke her gentle, careful touches. "You stayed." She raised her head to find Gabriel watching her, his eyes clearer than they'd been in hours. Weak winter sunlight filtered through the windows. The storm had passed. "Of course I stayed." Her voice was rough with exhaustion and unshed tears. "Someone had to make sure you didn't die out of sheer stubbornness." His smile was faint but real. "Hurts too much to be dead." "Good. Hold on to that." She checked his forehead, still warm, but not dangerously so. "Do you remember what happened?" "Saw the branch starting to fall? Jackson was directly under it." He tried to shift and winced. "Got him mostly clear, I think." "You saved his life." She indicated the sleeping form across the room. "Doctor says he'll heal, though he'll have a limp." "Worth it, then." His hand found hers, grip weak but determined. "You shouldn't have come. The storm, your reputation." "Gabriel Blackwood, if you lecture me about propriety while lying half dead, I swear I'll finish what that branch started." He actually chuckled, though it turned into a cough. "Yes, ma'am." Anders arrived with the dawn, bringing hot breakfast and news that Dr. Morrison was on his way back up. He took in the scene, Ella holding Gabriel's hand, neither making any attempt to hide the connection, and simply nodded. "Good to see you awake, boss. Boys have been worried." Over the following days, Ella established a routine that scandalized proper society and warmed the hearts of 30 rough loggers. She came up each morning, driven by whoever was heading to town, and stayed until evening. She helped change bandages, ensured both men ate properly, and ran the informal nursing station with the same efficiency she managed her shop. Sarah and the other girls kept the sewing business running, while Martha packed food that mysteriously appeared at the camp each day. The town watched and whispered, but something had shifted after the dance. The seamstress and the camp manager. Perhaps it wasn't so shocking after all. William Prescott made one attempt to visit, arriving with his wife and false concern. "Really, Miss Morgan, don't you think a professional nurse would be more appropriate?" "Are you offering to pay for one?" Ella asked sweetly, not pausing in her work of organizing medical supplies. "Well, no, but surely—" "Then I'll continue doing what's needed." She finally looked at him, letting him see the exhaustion and determination in her eyes. "As I've always done, despite the opinions of small men." He left quickly, pulling his protesting wife behind him. Constance kept glancing back, something like envy in her pretty face as she watched Ella move confidently through this male domain. A week after the accident, Gabriel took his first steps, leaning heavily on Anders but upright. The men cheered, and Ella had to turn away to hide sudden tears. None of that, Gabriel said softly, catching her hand. I'm too stubborn to die, remember? I remember. She squeezed his fingers. But you scared me badly. Gabriel Blackwood, don't do it again. I'll try, but Ella. He pulled her closer, mindful of watching eyes but past caring. When I was lying there, thinking I might die. Know what I regretted most? What? That I'd wasted so much time being proper, dancing with you once when I should have been dancing with you all along. His voice dropped. Almost dying clarifies things wonderfully. She felt heat rise in her cheeks, but didn't pull away. Gabriel, the men are watching. Let them. But he released her hand, stepping back carefully. When I'm healed proper, we'll talk. About dancing and other things. That evening, as Tommy drove her back to town through purple twilight, Ella allowed herself to imagine that conversation. The camp fell away behind them, lights beginning to twinkle in windows, men settling in for the night knowing their boss would recover. She'd saved no lives with her nursing. The doctor had done that. But she'd stayed when staying mattered, choosing connection over convention, and in Gabriel's eyes, when he looked at her, she saw a future forming, one that had nothing to do with being proper and everything to do with being true. The Widowmaker had failed to claim its victims. Sometimes, Ella thought, that's all the miracle anyone could ask for. That and a stubborn man who saw her clearly and wanted her anyway. The rest, the dancing he'd promised, the conversations yet to come would happen in its time. For now, it was enough to know he lived, he healed, and he looked at her like she was worth almost dying for. In Silver Creek, as winter settled over the mountains, that was more than enough. It was everything. The conversation Gabriel had promised came 3 weeks later, on a December evening when snow fell soft as whispered secrets. He appeared at Martha's boarding house just as Ella was closing the shop, moving carefully but steadily. The worst of his injuries now faded to yellow-green bruises. "Walk with me," he asked, offering his arm. She glanced at the window where Martha was definitely not watching while pretending to adjust the curtains. "It's snowing." "Barely, and I need to move. Doctor's orders." His gray eyes held something that made her pulse quicken. "Please, Ella." She fetched her cloak and took his arm, aware of Sarah and Bethany peering from the sewing room. The town was quiet, most people inside for supper. Snow dust sparkled in the lamplight as they walked slowly toward the small park at the center of town. "How's Jackson?" she asked, filling the silence that felt too heavy with meaning. "Healing. He'll walk again, though as Doc predicted, with a limp. I've offered him work in the camp office once he's able." Gabriel paused under a large pine tree that provided shelter from the falling snow. "Ella, I need to say something." She waited, heart hammering. These weeks of nursing him had stripped away the last pretenses between them. She'd seen him weak, frightened, fighting pain with gritted teeth. He'd seen her exhausted, worried, working with single-minded determination to keep him alive. There was no going back to careful distances. "My wife, Margaret," he began slowly, "was sunshine. Everything about her was light and laughter and easy joy. When she died, I thought that was it for me. Thought I'd hand out my days in darkness and be content with it." Ella said nothing, but her hand tightened on his arm. "Then you arrived," he continued. "Too tall, too proud, too stubborn to admit defeat. You're not sunshine, Ella. You're moonlight, cooler, quieter, but just as necessary. Maybe more so, for someone like me who's lived in shadows too long." "Gabriel, let me finish." He turned to face her fully, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek. "I'm not an easy man. I've got blood on my hands and too many rough edges. I run a logging camp. For God's sake, dangerous work that could make you a widow before you're even a wife. But Ella Morgan, I love you with whatever's left of this battered heart. Have since you took my hand at that dance and didn't flinch when I told you what I'd done." She closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. "You think I care about easy? I'm nearly 30. Unmarried, too tall for any sensible man. I've built a business that scandalizes proper society. I spent a week nursing you without a chaperone and don't regret a minute of it." She opened her eyes, meeting his directly. "I love you too, Gabriel, despite my better judgment and Martha's constant warnings." His smile transformed his face. "Martha warns you about me. Constantly says you're trouble wrapped in respectability. She's not wrong." He grew serious again. "Ella, I'm asking if you'll marry me. Not because it's proper or expected, but because the thought of facing another day without you feels like facing it without air. Will you have me?" Instead of answering immediately, she reached up and pulled his head down, kissing him with all the pent-up longing of the past months. He made a sound of surprise, then gathered her against him, kissing her back with desperate thoroughness. When they finally parted, both breathing unsteadily, she smiled. "Yes, though you should know I intend to keep working. I won't be a traditional wife who stays home and tends house. Wouldn't want you to be. Your work matters to you, to the town, to my men who finally have clothes that last." He kissed her again, softly. "Though I do have one request." "What's that?" "Move the business to the camp. There's an empty building that could be converted to a workshop. You and your girls would be safe there, and you wouldn't have to travel back and forth." She considered this. The town gossips would have a field day. "Let them. We'll be married. Your assistants would live in town and come up daily. It's practical. Nothing more." His eyes glinted. "And it would mean I could see you whenever I wanted, which is purely selfish, but there it is. I'll think about it." But she was already imagining it a proper workshop with room to expand, away from the town's watching eyes. When what? When do you want to marry? Tomorrow wouldn't be too soon." At her laugh, he grew thoughtful. "Christmas. Give the town something to celebrate besides the birth of Christ." 3 weeks, Gabriel. I need to make a dress." "You have a shop full of seamstresses. Put them to work." He pulled her close again. "Please, Ella, I've wasted enough time. Nearly dying taught me that tomorrow isn't promised. I want to start the new year as your husband." She thought of all the reasons to wait propriety, preparation, the endless details a wedding required. Then she thought of those dark hours beside his sickbed, praying for more time. Christmas. She agreed. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur. News of the engagement spread through Silver Creek like wildfire, reactions ranging from delighted Martha, the logging crews, to scandalized Prescott and his circle to resign those who'd seen it coming since the dance. Sarah and Bethany threw themselves into creating Ella's wedding dress with fervor. "It has to be perfect," Sarah insisted, sketching design after design. "You're our Miss Morgan. You deserve the most beautiful dress ever made." They settled on ivory silk, not white, which would have been presumptuous for a woman Ella's age, but a warm cream that complemented her coloring. The design was elegant but practical, with long sleeves for warmth and a train that could be bustled for dancing. Gabriel, meanwhile, dealt with logistics with military efficiency. The church was reserved. The minister briefed and convinced, with some effort, that marrying the camp manager and the controversial seamstress was not contrary to God's plan, and a reception planned at the hotel. "You don't need to arrange everything," Ella protested one evening as he showed her the menu he'd negotiated. "Yes, I do." He pulled her onto his lap, ignoring her half-hearted protest about propriety. They were in Martha's parlor, the door properly open, but he'd grown increasingly careless about such things. "You've spent your whole life doing everything alone. Let me do this for you." The wedding day dawned clear and bright, snow sparkling like scattered diamonds. Ella stood before her mirror, hardly recognizing herself. The dress was everything she'd dreamed sophisticated, flattering, making her height seem regal rather than awkward. Her dark hair was pinned up with small white roses from Anna Schmidt's greenhouse. "Beautiful," Martha breathed from the doorway. "Oh, Ella,
You're absolutely beautiful.
The church was packed. It seemed the entire town had come, drawn by curiosity, affection, or simple love of spectacle. The logging crews took up 3 full pews, scrubbed and polished in their Sunday best. Even Jackson had made it, supported by crutches but determined to see his boss married. When the music began and Ella walked down the aisle alone, having no male relative to give her away, and seeing no need to pretend otherwise, she kept her eyes on Gabriel. He stood at the altar in a black suit, Anders beside him as best man, his gray eyes fixed on her with an expression that made her knees weak. The ceremony was simple, the vows traditional, but when Gabriel said, "I do," his voice carried the weight of a man who'd faced death and chosen life. When Ella echoed the words, she felt the last walls around her heart crumble. "You may kiss your bride," Reverend Mills pronounced, and Gabriel did, thoroughly enough to raise blushes and cheers in equal measure. The reception was livelier than any event Silver Creek had seen. The loggers took turns dancing with the bride, each careful of her dress and absolutely delighted to be included. Tommy Chen made a speech that had everyone dabbing at their eyes, talking about how Miss Ella had shown the town that being different wasn't something to hide. "She stands tall," the young man said, raising his glass, "and she taught us all to do the same." William Prescott and his wife made a brief appearance, offering stilted congratulations. Constance studied Ella's dress with poorly concealed envy. "It's beautiful," she said quietly when William stepped away. "You look happy." "I am," Ella replied simply. "I wanted him. You know, Gabriel. When I first arrived and heard about the tragic widower." Constance's pretty face twisted slightly. "But he never saw me. Only ever had eyes for you, even before he admitted it." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. You match. William and I." She glanced at her husband, who was pompously explaining something to a glazed-looking townsman. "We look right together, but that's all. You and Gabriel are right together." As evening fell and the party continued, Gabriel pulled Ella away to the hotel's small balcony. Below them, Silver Creek sparkled with light and life. "Regrets?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Not one." She leaned back against him, feeling his solid warmth. "You? Only that I waited so long to find you." He turned her to face him. "I love you, Mrs. Blackwood. All of you. Your height, your pride, your competence, your kindness. I love that you came when I was hurt, that you stayed when staying was hard. I love that you're already planning how to reorganize that workshop at the camp." She laughed. "How did you know?" "Because I know you, and I plan to spend the rest of my life knowing you better." They returned to the party for one last dance, moving together as naturally as breathing while snow began to fall outside. The town watched and whispered, but now the whispers were warm, approving. The giant seamstress and the camp manager who would have thought it would work. But Ella and Gabriel knew better. They'd found in each other not what was expected or proper, but what was necessary, someone who saw clearly and loved anyway, who stood tall in their own way and made space for another to stand beside them. As the clock struck midnight and Christmas Day began, they left the party amid a shower of good wishes. Tomorrow would bring the move to the camp, the merging of 2 lives that had been solitary too long. There would be challenges, there always were, when unconventional people chose unconventional paths. But tonight, as Gabriel carried his bride over the threshold of their new life, Ella Morgan Blackwood knew with bone-deep certainty that she was exactly where she belonged, not despite her height or her pride or her stubborn independence, but because of them. She was home. Life at North Camp settled into a rhythm that surprised everyone with its natural ease. The converted workshop stood at the edge of the camp, close enough for convenience but separate enough to maintain propriety. Gabriel had outdone himself with the transformation: large windows for light, a proper cutting table, storage for fabric, and even a small office where Ella could manage accounts. The camp manager's house, where Ella now lived as Mrs., Blackwood was a modest but comfortable cabin a short walk from both the workshop and the main camp buildings. She'd added her own touches curtains at the windows, her mother's rocking chair by the fireplace, books on shelves Gabriel had built himself. 3 months into their marriage, on a March morning when the first hints of spring touched the air, Ella stood in her workshop reviewing orders. Sarah, Bethany, and 2 new girls, Anna Keller and Mary Sullivan, worked at their stations, the sound of scissors and sewing machines creating a familiar symphony.
Mrs. Blackwood.
Sarah called.
Mrs. Chen is here with her boys for their fittings.
Ella smiled at the title she was still getting used to. The Chen family had become regular customers, along with many other town families who made the journey to the camp workshop. What had started as necessity clothing for loggers had grown into something more.
Mrs. Chen, how lovely to see you. Boys, you've grown again.
The Chen boys, aged 8 and 10, submitted to measuring with the resignation of children who knew resistance was futile. Their mother watched with satisfaction. Your prices are fair, and the clothes last. Mrs. Chen said simply, why would we go anywhere else? This had become Ella's unexpected reputation: fair prices, quality work, and no judgment about who wore what or why. She'd made tiny clothes for Anna Schmidt's new grandbaby, a wedding dress for the saloon keeper's daughter, scandalizing some. But Ella maintained that every bride deserved to feel beautiful, and sturdy work clothes for the increasing number of women taking on traditionally male jobs as the frontier demanded. Rider coming fast, Bethany announced from her spot by the window.
Looks like trouble.
Ella moved to look, recognizing the horse before the rider, one of the mounts from Riverside Camp. The man pulled up hard, spraying mud, and she saw it was Frank Morrison, their foreman. Fire, he gasped as Gabriel and several men emerged from the office. Riverside's burning started in the cook shed, spread to the bunkhouse. We need every man you can spare. Gabriel was already moving, shouting orders. Anders, take 20 men in the water wagon. Ezra, gather all the buckets and canvas we have. He turned to Ella. Get the medical supplies ready. There'll be burns, smoke damage.
Already thinking of it.
She turned to her assistants. Sarah, run to town for Dr. Morrison. Bethany, help me gather supplies. Anna and Mary, clear the cutting table, we'll need it for wounded. The next hours tested everyone. Men streamed back and forth between the camps, fighting desperately to save what they could. Ella and her girls transformed the workshop into a makeshift medical station, treating burns, smoke inhalation, and exhaustion. It was near sunset when Gabriel returned, soot-blackened and exhausted. We saved most of the camp, but the bunkhouse is gone. 8 men have nowhere to sleep, nothing but the clothes on their backs. Ella was already calculating.
We have fabric. The girls and I can work through the night basic clothes to get them through.
Martha will help, and I'll bet other women will too if we ask. Ella, you can't. Yes, I can. She was already pulling bolts of fabric from storage. Send word to town. Anyone who can sew, come to the workshop. We'll set up an assembly line. By midnight, the workshop blazed with lamplight and activity. 15 women had answered the call. Including some unexpected volunteers, Constance Prescott arrived with her sewing basket, saying simply, I can do basic seams. Even Mrs. Henderson from the general store appeared, grumbling about the late hour, but settling in to cut fabric with practiced efficiency. They worked through the night cutting, pinning, stitching. Simple shirts and trousers, nothing fancy but sturdy and well-made. Ella moved among them, coordinating efforts, ensuring quality even in haste. You've built something special here, Martha observed during a brief rest, looking around the room full of women from all levels of Silver Creek society working side by side. This isn't just about clothes anymore. She was right. As dawn broke and the last garments were finished, Ella realized her workshop had become something unexpected, a gathering place where women's skills were valued, where the banker's wife worked alongside the laundress, where being useful mattered more than being proper. The Riverside men arrived as the women were packing up, exhausted and still smelling of smoke. The gratitude on their faces when they saw the neat stacks of clothes brought tears to more than one eye. "Don't know how to thank you, ma'am," Frank Morrison said, hat in hand. "Losing everything we own, then having this waiting, it's more kindness than rough men like us usually see."
"Nonsense," Ella said briskly, though she was touched. "You do the same for our men. Now go get cleaned up. These clothes won't look their best on men covered in soot."
As the workshop emptied, Gabriel pulled her into his arms, uncaring of the soot transferring to her dress. "You're remarkable. You know that." "I'm practical," she corrected, though she leaned into his embrace.
"And I have good help."
"More than that." He pulled back to look at her. "You've changed this place. The camp, the town, they're different because of you. Better. We've changed it," she said, "together." The fire's aftermath brought unexpected consequences. Riverside's owner, impressed by the community response, offered to pay for clothes for all his men, not just replacement but regular orders. Pine Ridge Camp followed suit, then 2 more camps farther up the mountain. Within a month, Ella's workshop had more orders than they could handle. She hired 4 more seamstresses and instituted training programs for girls like Bethany who showed promise. The workshop expanded into an adjoining building, with specialized areas for different types of garments. But growth brought challenges. On an April afternoon, Ella was deep in account books when angry voices erupted from the main workshop. She hurried out to find William Prescott facing off with Sarah, his face red with indignation. "I demand to speak with Mrs. Blackwood immediately." "I'm here, Mr. Prescott. What seems to be the trouble?" He turned on her, waving a piece of paper. This is the trouble. My wife has apparently been working here secretly, and now she's given notice at her position as secretary of the Ladies' Aid Society to work here full-time." Ella glanced at the paper Constance's resignation, written in her neat hand. "Mrs. Prescott is an adult who can make her own decisions about employment. She's my wife. She has obligations, a position to maintain. She has skills that were being wasted." Constance appeared from the cutting room, chin high. "I'm good at this. William, better at it than I am at pouring tea and gossiping. You're making a spectacle of yourself, working like a common."
"Like a skilled craftsperson earning honest wages," Ella interrupted coolly. "There's nothing common about it."
Prescott spluttered, but Constance stood firm. "I'm staying. William, for the first time in my life, I'm doing something that matters. These clothes we make, they protect people, keep them warm, last through hard use. That's worth more than all the tea parties in Oregon." He stormed out, but Constance stayed. Over the following weeks, she proved herself invaluable not just for her sewing skills but for her unexpected business acumen. She helped Ella negotiate contracts, suggested efficiency improvements, and even designed a line of work clothes specifically for women that became unexpectedly popular. "I misjudged you terribly," Constance admitted one evening as they worked late on a large order. "When I first came here, all I saw was your height and your refusal to be diminished. It threatened me. And now I see what I could have been all along if I'd had your courage." She smiled wryly. "Though I suspect I needed to fail at being perfectly proper before I could succeed at being myself." Spring turned to summer, bringing new challenges and victories. The workshop now employed 20 women regularly and provided piecework for a dozen more. Gabriel joked that Ella's operation was becoming more successful than the logging camp itself. One warm evening in June, Ella was closing the workshop when she felt a wave of dizziness. She gripped the table edge until it passed, but Gabriel noticed. "You've been tired lately," he said, studying her with concern. "And you barely touched dinner last night." "It's nothing, just working too hard." But even as she said it, she wondered. There had been other signs: morning queasiness, unusual fatigue, and... "Ella," Gabriel's voice sharpened.
What is it?" She did quick calculations in her head, then met his eyes with wonder dawning. "I think, Gabriel, I think I might be carrying." His face went through a series of expressions: shock, joy, concern, and back to joy. "A baby, our baby." "I'll need to see Dr. Morrison to be sure, but—" She placed a hand on her still flat stomach. "Yes, I think so." He crossed to her in 2 strides, gathering her carefully against him. "Ella, my love, a baby." He pulled back suddenly. "You should sit. Should you sit? Do you need anything?" She laughed, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. "I need you to stop panicking. Women have been having babies while working for centuries." "Not my woman, not my baby." But he was smiling, his hand coming to rest over hers on her stomach. "Winter, I think December or January." "A Christmas baby. Like us, everything important happens at Christmas." He kissed her softly. "I love you, both of you." The workshop door burst open, making them spring apart. Sarah rushed in, face flushed with excitement. "Mrs. Blackwood, Mr. Blackwood, you need to come quick. There's a delegation from Salem here, something about a state contract for prison uniforms. They want to talk to the woman who's revolutionized work clothes." Ella and Gabriel exchanged glances. State contracts would mean security, growth, recognition far beyond Silver Creek. It would also mean more responsibility, more challenges to navigate while preparing for a child. "Tell them we'll be right there," Ella said. As Sarah rushed out, Gabriel took her hand. "Ready for another adventure?" She thought of all that had changed in 18 months, from sitting alone on a log in the snow to standing here, successful, loved, carrying new life. Every challenge had brought growth. Every risk had brought reward. "With you always." They walked toward the main office, hand in hand, ready to face whatever came next. Behind them, the workshop stood ready for tomorrow's work bolts of fabric waiting to become clothes that would protect and serve. Sewn by women who'd found purpose and independence in the rhythm of needles and thread. Ella Morgan Blackwood had come west seeking a new life. What she'd built was a new world, one stitch, one choice, one act of courage at a time. And now, with new life growing within her and new opportunities ahead, that world was about to grow even larger. The giant seamstress had become so much more, and her story was far from over. October arrived with golden larches and the crisp promise of winter. Ella, now visibly expecting, stood before the assembled crowd in Silver Creek's town hall. The state contract had brought more than financial success. It had brought scrutiny, and with it, a formal challenge to the legitimacy of her operation. Mrs. Blackwood. Mayor Thompson read from official-looking papers. "Certain concerned citizens have raised questions about the propriety of your workshop, particularly given your delicate condition." Ella placed a protective hand over her rounded belly. At 7 months pregnant, she couldn't hide her state, nor did she intend to. Beside her, Gabriel stood rigid with controlled anger. "Which concerned citizens?" Ella asked calmly. William Prescott rose from his seat, Constance notably absent from his side. "It's unseemly, a woman in your condition, running a business, employing other women away from their proper duties, employing 23 women who support 47 children among them." Ella interrupted. "Women who were taking in washing for pennies, who were one illness away from destitution." "That's not the point." "That's exactly the point." Dr. Morrison stood, his weathered face stern. "I've delivered half the babies in this valley, and I can tell you that Mrs. Blackwood is healthier than most expectant mothers I see. Work doesn't harm women. Poverty does." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Anna Schmidt stood next. "My daughter Elizabeth works at the workshop. She's saving money for school, going to be a teacher. Without Mrs. Blackwood, she'd be married off to the first man who'd take her." One by one, others rose. Tom Harper, still walking with his slight limp but standing tall. "Mrs.
Blackwood's clothes saved my life. That extra padding she puts in, doctor says it kept my spine from breaking worse when I took another fall. Mrs. Chen, dignified despite her broken English. My boys grow so fast. Mrs. Blackwood. She makes special hems, can let down when needed, no waste. She understand family needs. Even Reverend Mills spoke. I've seen nothing but Christian charity from the workshop. They clothe the poor, employ the needy, ask fair prices. If this isn't God's work, I don't know what is. Prescott grew redder with each testimonial. But the state contract, surely they won't want to work with a woman who... Who what? A new voice from the back made everyone turn. A well-dressed man with graying hair walked forward. Who runs the most efficient operation we've contracted with, who delivered our first order 2 weeks early and under budget? Mr. Harrison. Mayor Thompson rose. We weren't expecting you from Salem. I came when I heard there might be difficulties. Mr. Harrison faced the crowd. The state of Oregon is proud to work with Blackwood Garments. Mrs. Blackwood's operation is a model we hope to see replicated: fair wages, quality products, and opportunities for women to support themselves respectably. He turned to Prescott. Unless you have evidence of actual impropriety, not just offense at a pregnant woman working, I suggest this matter be closed. Prescott sank into his seat, defeated. But Ella wasn't finished. She stepped forward, Gabriel's hand at her back in silent support. Mr. Prescott is right about one thing. Change is unseemly. It disrupts comfort, challenges assumptions. A year ago, I sat on a log outside this town, rejected and alone because I didn't fit someone's idea of proper. She looked directly at Prescott. Your idea, actually. She turned to address the broader crowd. Since then, I've built something I'm proud of. Not alone with all of you. With women who needed work and men who needed clothes that wouldn't fall apart. With a husband who sees strength where others see scandal. She smiled at Gabriel. And now with a child who will grow up in a world where their mother's work is valued, not hidden. The workshop stays open. It will grow. And yes, I will work until this baby comes and return as soon as I'm able. Because that's what women do. We work, we build, we nurture. All at once. It's not unseemly. It's life. The applause started slowly, Martha first, then Sarah and the workshop women, spreading until even some of Prescott's allies were clapping. Mayor Thompson gavelled for order, officially dismissing all complaints against the workshop. As the crowd dispersed, Constance appeared at Ella's elbow. She wore a simple work dress, her hands showing the calluses of honest labor. William's filing for divorce, she said quietly. Says I've shamed him beyond bearing. I'm sorry. I'm not. Constance's smile was sad but genuine. I've been living as someone's idea of me for so long, I'd forgotten who I actually was. The workshop gave me that back. She squeezed Ella's hand. Thank you. That evening, Ella and Gabriel walked slowly back to North Camp. The baby was active, responding perhaps to the day's excitement. Gabriel's hand rested protectively on her back. You were magnificent, he said, though I wanted to throw Prescott out a window. Violence solves nothing. Public humiliation. However, she smiled. Did you see his face when Mr. Harrison spoke? I did. He grew serious. Ella, with the state contract and the new orders, you'll need to expand again. Maybe it's time to bring in a manager, someone to handle the daily operations while I would sit quietly and knit booties. While you grow our child and perhaps don't work 16-hour days. She sighed. He wasn't wrong. The workshop had grown beyond what she could manage alone, especially with a baby coming. Who would you suggest? Constance. Ella stopped walking, surprised. Constance Prescott. She's brilliant with numbers. The women respect her, and she needs the work now. Plus, he smiled slightly. She owes her freedom to you. She'll be loyal. It made sense. Constance had proven herself capable, and her social connections, even diminished by scandal, could be useful. I'll speak with her tomorrow. They resumed walking. The lights of North Camp glowing ahead. The expansion building was nearly complete, doubling their workspace. Orders were backed up through spring.
Gabriel,
Ella said suddenly.
what if I can't do it all, the workshop, the baby, being a wife?
He stopped, turning her to face him.
Then you do what you can and ask for help with the rest.
You've built a community, Ella. Let them support you the way you've supported them. She leaned into him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. The baby kicked, as if in agreement. The first snow came early that year, dusting the mountains while the valleys still wore autumn gold. Ella worked with Constance to establish new systems production schedules, quality standards, training protocols. The former society wife threw herself into the work with surprising passion.
I've been thinking,
Constance said one afternoon as they reviewed orders.
What if we offered apprenticeships, formal training for girls, with certificates when they complete the program?
That's ambitious. Ella shifted, trying to find a comfortable position. The baby seemed determined to press against her ribs. But brilliant. We could partner with the school, offer credits. They were deep in planning when Sarah burst in. Mrs. Blackwood. It's happening in Salem. They're voting on women's suffrage. The workshop erupted in excited chatter. Oregon had been debating women's voting rights for years. Ella had signed petitions, attended meetings when she could, but the workshop had consumed most of her energy.
We should close early,
Constance suggested. Let anyone who wants to go to town for the news. Ella agreed, though she stayed behind, too tired for the journey. Gabriel found her there as sunset painted the mountains purple, sitting with her feet up, hands resting on her belly. The vote failed, he said gently, but it was close, closer than ever before. She sighed.
I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. Change comes slowly.
But it comes. He sat beside her, taking her hand. Look at what you've built. A year ago, women working outside the home was scandal. Now the state contracts with you. That's its own revolution. A quiet one. The best kind. The kind that lasts. He kissed her temple. Come home. Martha sent soup, and you need rest. November brought larger snows and the workshop's busiest season. Orders for winter clothes poured in not just from camps, but from townspeople who'd learned the value of well-made garments. Ella trained Constance intensively, preparing for her coming confinement. You're ready, Ella told her the week before Thanksgiving. The women trust you. The systems are in place. But I'm not you, Constance protested. They follow you because you're Ella Blackwood, who stands tall and doesn't apologize. They'll follow you because you're Constance Prescott, who chose independence over comfort. Ella smiled. Besides, I'll only be gone a few weeks. But even as she said it, she wondered. The baby felt enormous, her body foreign and unwieldy. What if she couldn't return to work quickly? What if motherhood changed her in ways she couldn't predict? The answer came the first week of December. Ella woke to pain and pressure. Gabriel already scrambling for the doctor. Labor was long but uncomplicated. And as dawn broke over snow-covered peaks, Margaret Sarah Blackwood entered the world loud, healthy, and perfect. She's got your stubborn chin, Gabriel said, cradling his daughter with wonder. And your skeptical eyebrows, Ella countered, exhausted but exhilarated. Look how she's studying everything, like she's taking notes for later discussion. Martha bustled in with tea and pronouncements. Strong girl, good lungs. She'll need them with parents like you two. The workshop sent a delegation led by Sarah and Constance, bringing a tiny quilt sewn by all the women, each adding a square. Looking at it, all those different hands united in creation, Ella felt tears rise. We kept everything running, Constance reported proudly. Didn't miss a single deadline, though everyone's eager for you to come back when you're ready. After Christmas, Ella promised, already missing the familiar rhythm of work. But when Christmas came, bringing with it the anniversary of her wedding, Ella found herself content to simply be. Margaret slept in her arms while snow fell outside. Gabriel reading aloud from Dickens by the fire. The workshop hummed along under Constance's management, orders filled, women employed, the revolution continuing quietly. "Do you remember?" Gabriel said suddenly, setting aside his book. "That first Christmas you sitting on that log, too proud to cry." "I remember." She smiled at the memory. "I thought my life was over. And instead, it began." She looked around their home, simple but warm, filled with evidence of the life they'd built. Books and sewing baskets, Gabriel's work boots by the door, Margaret's cradle made by the camp carpenters with loving care. "I found work that matters, people who see me clearly, a love I didn't think possible. And now her." Margaret stirred, making small sounds of protest at the world's continued existence. Gabriel took her expertly, walking the familiar path around the room that seemed to soothe her. What kind of world will she inherit? Ella wondered aloud. Will she have to fight the same battles? Different battles, probably, but she'll be ready. He smiled down at their daughter. She's got you for a mother. She'll know how to stand tall. A knock interrupted Tommy Chen with a message. The state wanted to expand the contract, and there was interest from Washington Territory as well. The workshop's reputation was spreading. "Tell Constance to handle the negotiations." Ella said, "I trust her judgment." After Tommy left, Gabriel raised an eyebrow. "That was easier than I expected. No urge to rush back and manage everything yourself." "Oh, the urge is there." Ella rose, stretching muscles still sore from childbirth. "But you were right. I built a community. Time to trust them." She joined him at the window, where snow continued to fall. "Besides, I have a feeling Margaret's going to be her own full-time operation." As if in agreement, their daughter opened her eyes gray like her father's, alert like her mother's, and gazed at them with solemn consideration. The future stretched ahead, uncertain but full of promise. There would be challenges there always were for women who refused to shrink themselves. But there would also be victories, small and large, as more women found their voices and their strength. The giant seamstress had become a mother, a businesswoman, a quiet revolutionary, and in the warmth of their cabin, with snow falling soft outside and her daughter beginning to fuss for feeding, Ella Blackwood knew that every step, every rejection, every small triumph, every stitch sewn in hope had led her exactly where she needed to be. The workshop would thrive. Women would find independence through honest work, and Margaret Sarah Blackwood would grow up in a world slightly wider than the one her mother had known, all because one too-tall woman had refused to sit quietly in the corner and had chosen instead to build something that mattered. The revolution continued, one careful stitch at a time. The January night was bitter cold, with wind rattling the windows of the Blackwood cabin. Margaret, now 6 weeks old, had been fussing for hours. Ella paced the floor, exhaustion weighing heavy on her shoulders, the baby crying despite every effort to soothe her. "Here," Gabriel said softly, appearing at her elbow. "Let me take her. She wants to nurse, but she won't latch properly. And," Ella's voice cracked with frustration and fatigue, "you're both tired." He took Margaret with practiced ease, settling into the rocking chair. "Rest for a moment. Just close your eyes." Ella sank onto the bed, listening to Gabriel's low humming. Within minutes, Margaret's cries softened to whimpers, then silence. She opened her eyes to find Gabriel watching her, the baby peaceful in his arms. "How do you do that?" "Years of calming spooked horses." He smiled slightly. "Same principle, steady voice, patient hands." She moved to sit beside them, studying their daughter's face in the lamplight. "I thought I could do everything. Gabriel, run the workshop, raise Margaret, keep our home." "You can, just not all at once." and not alone. He shifted Margaret to one arm, reaching for Ella's hand with the other. You taught this whole town that asking for help isn't weakness. Maybe it's time you learned your own lesson. A knock interrupted, soft, tentative. Gabriel rose to answer, finding Sarah on the porch, bundled against the cold. I'm sorry to disturb you, she said, but there's a woman at the workshop. She walked from the riverside camp her husband threw her out. She has nowhere else to go. Ella was already reaching for her shawl. Is she hurt? Cold and scared mostly. Constance is with her, but she keeps asking for you. Says she heard you help women. They bundled Margaret warmly, and the small family made their way through the snow to the workshop. Inside, they found a young woman huddled by the stove, Constance offering her tea. She looked up as they entered, barely 20, with bruises fading to yellow on her cheek. You're Mrs. Blackwood. Her voice was tentative. They say you give women work, no questions asked. What's your name? Ella settled beside her, Margaret sleeping against her chest. Ruth Bailey, my husband. He doesn't like me working, but I'm good with a needle. My mother taught me. She looked down. He says a wife shouldn't earn money, shouldn't have thoughts beyond cooking and cleaning. But I heard about your workshop, how you employ women who need work. Can you start tomorrow? Ella asked simply. Ruth's eyes widened. You don't want to know why he threw me out, what I did wrong. Did you do anything wrong? I hid money from my sewing, things I took in secretly. I was saving to... She stopped, ashamed. To leave, Ella finished gently. To find safety and independence. Ruth nodded, tears starting. He found it, said a wife keeping secrets was worse than stealing. Then he's a fool. Ella's voice was firm. Constance will find you a room in town tonight, tomorrow. You come here and show us what you can do. We pay fair wages, and what you do with your earnings is your business alone. As Constance led Ruth away, Gabriel studied his wife. You're building more than a workshop. You know that, right? You're building a refuge. Is that wrong? Ella shifted Margaret, who stirred but didn't wake. Should I turn away women who need what we offer? Never, just observing that your quiet revolution is growing louder. He was right. Word spread about Ruth Bailey, how she'd found shelter and work when her husband cast her out. More women came, some openly, some secretly, all seeking the independence that came with honest wages. The workshop expanded again, adding dormitory rooms for women who needed temporary shelter. William Prescott, predictably, led the opposition. At February's town meeting, he stood before the assembled citizens with righteous fury. This workshop has become a haven for wayward women, encouraging wives to abandon their duties, their husbands, their sacred vows. Encouraging women to support themselves when their husbands fail too. Ella countered, standing despite Gabriel's protective hand on her arm. Margaret, in Sarah's arms, watched with solemn gray eyes. The Bible says wives should submit. The Bible also says workers deserve their wages. Reverend Mills rose, his usual mild manner sharpened. I've counseled some of these women, Prescott. They come to work not from waywardness, but from necessity. Husbands who drink away wages, who abandon families, who rule through fear rather than love. That's not... Furthermore, the Reverend continued, Proverbs 31 speaks of a wife of noble character who engages in profitable trading, who sees that her merchandise is good, sounds remarkably like Mrs. Blackwood's enterprise to me. The debate raged for an hour, but the tide had turned. Too many families had benefited from the workshop's presence. Too many women had found dignity in labor. Too many children were better fed and clothed because their mothers could earn. Motion to commend Blackwood Garments for service to the community, Mayor Thompson said finally. All in favor. The ayes overwhelmed the nays. Prescott stormed out, but not before shooting Ella a look of pure venom. He won't stop, Gabriel said quietly as they walked home. Men like him never do. Then neither will we. Ella adjusted Margaret's blanket against the cold. Every woman we employ, every girl we train, their votes for a different future, even if they can't cast them yet. March brought unexpected joy. Constance's engagement to Thomas Reed, the bank manager who'd been quietly courting her for months. He was a good man who saw Constance's business acumen as an asset, not a threat. I want to keep working, Constance told Ella as they planned the spring orders. Thomas understands. He says a talented wife is a blessing, not a burden. Keep him, Ella advised. Men who think that way are rare. But even as they celebrated Constance's happiness, trouble brewed. Ruth Bailey's husband had been spreading poison in the taverns, claiming the workshop stole wives and corrupted virtuous women. One night, rocks shattered 2 windows. With notes attached, "Close the den of sin." Gabriel wanted to post guards, but Ella refused. We won't work in fear. That's what they want, to make us small and scared. Instead, she had the windows replaced with larger ones, letting in more light. The women worked with the broken glass still being swept up, their rhythm unbroken. Ruth herself stitched with fierce concentration, each seam an act of defiance. The crisis came in early April. Ella had returned to full-time work. Margaret contentedly watched by Martha during the day. She was reviewing the state contract when Anders burst in. "Mrs. Blackwood, you need to come. There's trouble at the camp." She found Chaos William Prescott leading a group of men, blocking the lumber wagons. "This camp harbors immoral women," he shouted. "We demand the workshop be shut down." "You demand?" Gabriel's voice was dangerously quiet as he emerged from the office. "On whose authority?" "On the authority of decent Christian men who won't see their community corrupted." "Corrupted," Ella pushed through the crowd. Margaret in her arms she'd been nursing when Anders arrived. "By women earning honest wages, by families eating regular meals. By wives defying husbands, by fallen women finding shelter." Prescott's face was purple with rage. "That Bailey woman should be sent back to her husband, not protected by people with conscience." Dr. Morrison appeared, along with Reverend Mills and, surprisingly, Judge Henderson from the circuit court. "I asked these gentlemen to come. Mrs. Blackwood thought we might need legal and spiritual guidance." Judge Henderson, an imposing man with silver hair, studied the scene. "Mr. Prescott, are you blocking lawful commerce?" "We're protesting moral decay. You're interfering with business operations." The judge's voice brooked no argument. "These men have contracts to fulfill, wages to earn. Unless you have legal grounds to stop them, I suggest you move." "The law should protect families," Prescott sputtered. "The law protects individuals." Judge Henderson turned to address the gathered crowd. "Including women's rights to work, to earn, to live free from violence. Any man who thinks otherwise can explain himself in my courtroom." The crowd began dispersing, but Prescott wasn't finished. "This isn't over. Blackwood, you and your mannish wife." He never finished. Gabriel moved faster than Ella had ever seen, grabbing Prescott's collar and lifting him clear off the ground. "Threaten my wife again," Gabriel said, each word precise. "And judge or no judge, you'll answer to me, and unlike last time, I won't stop at one punch." Prescott paled, remembering perhaps the stories of Gabriel's past. When Gabriel released him, he scrambled away, his supporters melting back into the watching crowd. "Well," Judge Henderson said mildly, "I saw nothing actionable there, just a man defending his family." That night, as they tucked Margaret into her cradle, Ella found her hands shaking. "For a moment, I thought I wouldn't have killed him." Gabriel pulled her close. "But I wanted him to think I might. Men like Prescott only understand force. We can't build a future on threats." "No, but sometimes we must defend the present with them." He kissed her forehead. "You're changing the world. Ella, that makes you dangerous." I won't let anyone hurt you for it." The next morning brought unexpected support. 20 women from town marched to the workshop, led by Anna Schmidt and Mrs. Chen. "We stand with you," Anna announced. "Some of us work here. Some have daughters who do. All of us benefit from what you've built." They formed a protective circle around the workshop. Women of all ages and backgrounds united. When a few men came to cause trouble, they found themselves facing mothers, grandmothers, sisters, women who'd found their collective voice. By noon, the threat had passed. The troublemakers, faced with community opposition, slunk away. Inside the workshop, production never stopped. "They'll be back," Ruth Bailey said quietly, working beside Ella. "Men like that don't give up easy." "Neither do we." Ella watched Margaret sleeping in her basket, surrounded by the sound of sewing machines and women's voices. "Every day we're here, every wage we pay, every woman who walks taller because she can support herself, we're winning." April slipped into May, bringing wildflowers and easier weather. The workshop thrived despite opposition. Orders pouring in from 3 states. They employed 40 women directly, supported dozens more through piecework. One evening, as Ella nursed Margaret in the workshop office while reviewing accounts, Gabriel appeared with a telegram. "From Salem," he said, his expression unreadable. She took it with trembling fingers, reading quickly, then again, certain she'd misunderstood. "What is it?" Sarah asked, hovering anxiously. "The state legislature." Ella's voice came out choked. "They've passed a resolution, commending Blackwood Garments as a model business enterprise. They're recommending our apprentice program be replicated statewide." The workshop erupted in cheers. Women hugged, cried, laughed, understanding this was more than recognition. It was validation that their work mattered, that their independence was valuable, that change was possible. "We did it," Constance breathed, clutching Thomas's hand. "We actually did it." "We started it," Ella corrected, shifting Margaret to her shoulder. "Our daughters will finish it." As if understanding, Margaret made a sound that might have been agreement. Around them, women returned to work, but with new pride in their movements. They were no longer just seamstresses, they were pioneers, forging a path others would follow. That night, unable to sleep, Ella stood at their cabin window watching stars pierce the darkness. Gabriel joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "What are you thinking?" "About that woman on the log. How lost she was. How certain her life was over." She leaned into his warmth. "I wish I could tell her what was coming." "Would she have believed it?" "No," Ella smiled. "Too tall, too proud, too independent, who could love that, who could see value in that." She turned in his arms. "You did, from the very beginning. I saw a woman who wouldn't be diminished. Still see her." He touched Margaret's sleeping face gently. "Now I see her in miniature too." They stood together in comfortable silence, their daughter between them, their life's work humming along in the workshop below. It wasn't the life Ella had imagined when she stepped off that stagecoach. It was infinitely better. "I can't sleep without you anymore," Gabriel murmured into her hair, echoing words from what felt like a lifetime ago. "Then don't," she replied, just as she had then. But now the words carried new weight: partnership tested by fire, love deepened by struggle, future bright with possibility. Margaret stirred, and Ella began to hum a lullaby her mother had sung, passed down through generations of women who'd made their own way. Outside, dawn touched the mountains, painting them rose and gold. A new day in Silver Creek, in Oregon, in a changing world. The giant seamstress had become so much more wife, mother, revolutionary, builder of futures. And somewhere in the workshop below, sewing machines were already humming, women's hands creating more than clothes. They were stitching tomorrow, one careful seam at a time. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale, whether you're listening while driving through the countryside, relaxing at home, or perhaps even while doing your own crafting. Please share your thoughts and location in the comments below so we can connect and discuss Ella and Gabriel's journey together. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850. Give this video a like and hit the hype button to help more people discover these tales of love and courage from the American frontier. Your support helps keep these stories alive for listeners around the world.